Hi, this is my latest video, and it's just going to be all over the place because there are 4 or 5 things that I want to discuss for this video. One is culture vultures. This is this little phrase. Sometimes I think I come up with these phrases and then people notify me later that they don't think I came up with these phrases, but sometimes you can't track who comes up with these phrases, so I feel like there's a possibility that I do come up with some of these phrases. But anyway, culture vultures is something I want to discuss today. This term sorry, I want to discuss today. Apologies in general. I want to discuss hands on the bus, as I put it, and the evil eye. So if I forget myself, I'll have to come back to my phone, unless my phone dies. So why don't I start off with culture vultures? So in some of my previous videos, I had discussed the idea that you're born into this life with a certain expectation, I think, by God or by the universe, that you actually push yourself and go into what I call the North Node stuff, if you're into astrology, which is those things that become harder to you in this life, that your South Node would be everything you perfected in your previous life that comes easy to you, that's easy to do. You're not really pushing yourself out of your comfort zone so much. You're not really having to dig deep into your emotional wells and really address the injured child and really, shed some skin and really confront people that have hurt you and really let them know how much they've hurt you and really do that emotional work and that hard work that breaks us open like an egg. It breaks us open and then we become something different, something new, something beautiful, right? We're like a phoenix. We become transformed. But the gift is that we have to shed all this skin and we have to have all these painful experiences and really dig deep on our own psyche and our own subconsciousness and really evaluate and examine ourselves. So that requires emotional work. It requires emotional bravery. It's not really something that's taught or encouraged in our society. We're very much encouraged to take the easy way out and not really confront our inner demons or dig deep. And we kind of have an unwritten agreement sometimes in our social arrangements where it's almost like an unwritten agreement, like I'll only push you so far and you'll only push me so far. Like I'll only push you so far out of your comfort zone. I'll only rib you so much about your neuroticness or your lack of growth. I'll just kind of joke about it. I'll make it a point of humor, but I won't actually sit down and confront you and have like an intervention and tell you like you're wasting your life. Like you keep having the same repetitive relationships, or you're living in a place of fear, or you're stuck, or you're emotionally unhealthy, or you have tons of toxic relationships, so I can't help you because you're not willing to sever those ties. Like we're not really having those real conversations where we really are pushing our friends or our family or our lovers or our loved ones to really examine themselves and do deep work on themselves, right? Because we're afraid of rejection. We're afraid they're going to call us out on our shit. Like there's lots of reasons that people stay in these very safe places emotionally. So a lot of times there's like an unwritten agreement, right? That's like, I won't push you if you won't push me. Like I won't challenge you on your racism or classism, or I won't challenge you on the politicians you support or things like this. I won't ask those deeper questions of you because I would appreciate you not asking them of me, because I don't want to be outside of my comfort zone. I very much enjoy my comfort zone. I've, decorated it quite nicely, and I've planted little flower pots around it, and I've become quite, enamored with my little safety zone. So please don't push me out of that, right? And all of us are that injured child on the inside that's like scared to go and look at our injured selves and address the child parts of us that are still hurting from our childhood wounds, of rejection from a parent, even perceived rejection. I remember my sister once saying to me years ago, she was like, it's not like mom and dad didn't love you. She's like, but they couldn't give you the color that you needed. She's like, even I as a child would witness that, where it's like maybe you needed blue, and I would see them offer you like a big ball of green and a big hug of yellow and a big, meal of, fluorescent pink. And I was always, not feeling recognized or not feeling acknowledged for who I was, like truly seen. And that was something that bothered me my whole life, this whole sense of not being truly seen. So I was very much troubled by people saying like, I love you, when I really didn't see them as knowing who I was. I don't like authentic emotional experiences. I don't like people attributing emotions to experiences that are not actually valid. I'm very troubled by that. It seems very fake and disauthentic to me, and it kind of imbibes a disauthentic life. Like if you're going to say, I love you and you're my good friend, I just don't really trust people like that because I don't see them as being very authentic, and I'm not really interested in cultivating relationships like that. Like they mean nothing to me. So I think that was a difficult thing as a child to come to terms with. But when we, like our whole lives, we are developing this relationship with the injured child inside of us. Our whole lives, we are either stuffing that injured child away and saying, no, I'm an adult and I can shape my destiny, and I'm so far removed from whatever that pathetic weakling was that was a child, or that insecure 4-year-old, or that, broken down teenager. Like I'm so far removed from that. Like no one will ever put me back into that box. And you can say your whole friggin' life, I'm something so different than the insecurity and the open wounds that are just continually gushing, throughout our young childhood and so forth. But you're kind of kidding yourself in a way, right? Like you're stuffing this person away, but they're always haunting you. It's like the shadow of Peter Pan. It's like you need to find the shadow. It's part of your identity. It helps you fly. Like you need to understand it's part of yourself, right? But it's like this secret side of ourselves, this dirty side that we don't really want to be reminded of. But if you think about like the truest experiences of intimacy that you can ever have as a human being, whether it's through making love, whether it's through intimate friendships, whether it's through holding on to your friends or your family or your children or your parents and grandparents, like when you're really deeply holding someone, either physically in an embrace or just in the moment, you just feel held, like sisterhood, you just feel close with someone. There is an intimacy there that's almost like someone is reaching out and touching that part of you, that little hurt child part of you that is so hurt and so hidden, right? But is still so active in our psyche, like our entire lives. That's the little voice that says you're no good. That's the little voice that says when you get reprimanded that you are a piece of shit, and you've always been a piece of shit. Like it's just this little constant broken childhood self. And I think all of us have that. And we're so uncomfortable going there. And we're so uncomfortable really like seeing ourselves as that broken child and really understanding our motives and our fears and our desires and our interactions and our secrets. I think our secrets are really tied into that child self, that injured self. And anyway, I think it's like this hidden part of ourselves that we want to reveal to the right person, right? Like there's this cultural fascination with love in our society, which is really only like 150 years old. And before that, it was all like arranged marriages to plow the land or whatever. So it's not like we historically have had these relationships of love per se. This is like a romanticized concept that's relatively new in human history. Like it's within the last, 5% of the history of humans on this planet that we are enamored with the concept of love. But the concept of love, while it's the concept of romantic love, while it's a very beautiful concept in a lot of respects, it also doesn't help us in a lot of respects as well. So within the concept of romantic love, is this concept that we'll find that person who will take in that injured, hurt child self that we're carting around, and sometimes we're at odds with, and sometimes it's like the shadow side that Jung talked about, the shadow, like we don't want to know the shadow, we don't want to see the shadow. So sometimes we pack it away, amongst our defenses. Our defenses could be clutter. We could have lots of shit, that we kind of keep people away with, that our house is messy, it's not welcoming. Like there's certain messages you can send to people with your body language and so forth. So we just, and maybe we have dysfunctional relationships, we have short-term relationships, and then we have some drama, and then the person goes away and they always leave us. It's this repetitive pattern. We're always telling ourselves this person's leaving. And then we create that, right? We create a scenario where they leave. So it just kind of keeps that repetitive pattern of I'm not good, or I drive people away or something, but we are a contributing factor to that. So we're manifesting these concepts of who we are while we are slowly but surely in this lifetime going through the remnants of the injured self, the child self that we're carting around. So we're disenfranchised from it at times, or we're separated from it at times, and sometimes it's haunting to us. Like why, like lots of times, like in therapy, you might ask yourself, like, why am I not getting these things? And a lot of times it is that child self that we're just not really that comfortable being familiar with. So I've seen people that on the surface seem okay, but the more you dig, you see this mental health that's like very, very concerning, very one-dimensional relationships, no real capacity for intimacy, no real emotional bonds, and no real risking that's happening in their lives on the daily. And a lot of times people like that, it's a deep sadness for me as an empathic person, but as a therapist, as a healer, as a person who cares about people and the plants and animals and waters of this earth and, the universe at large. I think anyone who's really deeply sensitive in this life can sometimes pick up on the pain and suffering of these folks that, for whatever reason, I have a friend who's very emotionally unhealthy and hasn't chosen to have any relationships ever with anyone in terms of like an intimate relationship. And if you can just think of a stockpile of anxiety and angst your whole life about having intimacy and having some kind of relationship, and it's built up in movies, it's built up in TV shows, it's totally impregnated into our culture at large, that we're very obsessed with this romantic illusion, of happiness, and that the more, the more adapted people are going to have relationships, and are going to be with like one person. Like, it's a cultural expectation that you become comfortable with partnership. And so I think there are some people that, I'm not talking about people that are valid, that are really autonomous people that want to be asexual or something. I'm not really speaking to those people. I'm talking more about, in the case of my friend, you can sit by and make suggestions to someone about doing some deep healing work to really kind of explore their darker side and say, what are you scared of? Like, what are you scared of? Are you scared of rejection? Are you scared of being alone and being eventually, like, trusting somebody and then having them leave you like everyone else has ever left you? Like why wouldn't you even try? And I understand for some people, it's like the biggest experience in the world for them to like reach inside themselves and pull out their heart and put it on the table and risk and say, I'll be part of this bargaining with life experience, and just my heart is out here, and like someone could come along and slaughter it, but I'm going to trust that this person is not going to hurt me, or that hopefully they won't hurt me. Or you accept fully and embrace that life is suffering, and you say they will hurt me, and I accept this, and I'll hurt them, and this is part of the process. And both of us can try to be as conscious as possible in that process. But people are going to be people, and they're going to be stupid. They're animals. They sometimes, operate from a very animalistic point of themselves. And also we operate from a place of our own injury. Some of our injuries are not visual, so we don't know what injury someone else is carrying. And so it's a very scary process to put ourselves outside of our comfort zone willingly, not being forced there by someone, but willingly doing that and doing that work. But that's where the greatest healing happens, like not just for us, but for the planet as a whole, for the vibrational kind of evolution of the human species. It raises the vibration when everyone meditates, or everyone is coming from a place of functionality in their intimate relationships. But when I use the term culture vulture, I came up with that term after I had basically an in-law, but not really an in-law, but sort of an in-law. She would go to movies like religiously, and she would go to museums religiously. She was an atheist. She was a strong atheist. She was quite dismissive of religion. And she would travel excessively. But she appeared to me to be a very cold person and had had no significant relationships of intimacy with partners in her life, and lived a fairly isolated life where it was very tightly controlled in terms of her comfort zone. So her house always looked the same, and like doilies and little things were always in the same place, and everything was tightly controlled. The calendar was flipped to the next month, always on the last day of the month. Like, things were very controlled, and that bled out into every aspect of her life. Her relationships, even with her child, were somewhat one-dimensional in that she never expressed emotion. Her child told me themselves that she didn't express emotion to them or talk about feelings like "I love you" or things like this. And so what was interesting in observing that was like, after a while of observing this, I was like, I feel like there's this really strange phenomenon of a culture vulture. And then like, I remember her child asking me like, well, what do you mean by culture vulture? And I was just like, okay, so you have a person who really takes a lot of pride in being cultured, right? They go to the ballet and they go to the opera and they watch the latest opera that's in town, and then they tell their friends about it and so forth. But how much like deep emotional work are they doing on themselves? Like, they're not in therapy. They're never willing to do therapy. They're never willing to address their own childhood. They're never willing to go to couples therapy with somebody. They're not really willing to have like emotional relationships that are very deep or complex or have a lot of conflict, where you're working through conflict with somebody, which is kind of the deeper work of any relationship, which is letting someone know your boundaries or letting someone know when they piss you off and upset you and that they've injured the relationship, and like, how can we work on this together or not? Maybe it's like not repairable. Like, these are all part of the human experience of living and loving and fighting and dying and feeling sad and despondent and having bad breakups. Like, this is the fruit of life, right? This is the stuff of life. Like, this is why other cultures, when they look at America, are always like, why don't you guys have any like feelings? Because there's a very compartmentalized way, I think, of being American that doesn't really allow for it. Like, when you talk about like Greek, I always think about Greek funerals, where a certain type of Greek people will like throw themselves on the funerals when they're in at the caskets when they're in the ocean, and just like weep and weep and weep and hold the coffin, and I just feel like I was like that when my grandfather passed, where I was just holding his dead body and just like needing to just hold it and feel the physicalness of their spirit being gone and this just being their shell, and just, I need to hold this, right? So it's very similar to that, in that I think a lot of times Americans in general, but in this case I'm talking about a culture vulture kind of person, they would grieve, but they would feel almost embarrassment to grieve openly. It's like tears are somehow shameful instead of tears being a beautiful thing. That's a natural expression. It's totally good for our health. It coats our eyes. Like, tears are good, and like, it's good to be tearful, and we kind of shame each other, I think, in this culture about having emotions. Like, when we're having a bad day and we break down over something, I feel like people are like, oh, like, this is embarrassing, like you farted or something, but it's not. It's emotions, and that's not necessarily embarrassing, and that's kind of a sad observance that I have of American culture in general, or white people perhaps in general. But it's just interesting to me when you observe these people, because it's almost like a third eye they can't see. It's like they don't have a third eye, like they don't have a third eye, like they're third eye blind, so it's calcified, or their pineal gland is calcified or something. Like, you can't explain what they're missing. You can't explain what they're missing because they don't have the tool to see, because they don't have a third eye or something. Like, you can't explain to them like, well, you're a culture vulture, and they might be like, I don't know what you're talking about, and to just say to them like, so you haven't done any emotional work on yourself. Like, this whole lifetime you've been given this beautiful gift of a life, and you kind of wasted it. I think like God's probably ticked off at you and kind of like letting you live your little life, but just kind of like, man, that was a waste. Like, you're not doing any emotional work. You're not going to therapy. You're not working on your childhood. You're not developing intimate relationships. You're not working through conflict. You're living kind of a scared life. You're living kind of a safely controlled life where everything is within the confines of this little space that you created. And so anyone that pushes you outside of your comfort zone and is like, going to call you on your shit in any way whatsoever, it's like that person will be immediately eradicated from the scenario. Like, these people use whatever possible tactics they can. They will like rip into your soul and take whatever you've told them in confidence and just twist it and then throw it in your face. Like, they'll do anything to not make you go there, to push you away, to shame you, for not necessarily shaming them. You're not shaming them necessarily. You're just bringing to their attention, like, you're kind of living half a life here and you're not really digging deep. And I think that's painfully obvious that you're kind of living on the outskirts of life and looking in and calling it a life. But this isn't a life. Like, a life is messy. A life is going to have pain. It's going to have sadness. It's not going to be this tightly controlled process, And I think within that tight controlness, you lose the capacity for intimacy. You're so on top of what shoes and what clothing and what events you're going to and who's in your life and who's not, that you're losing that aspect of life, of just living and having life crack you open, and you're going to be a poached egg or a scrambled egg, you don't know, but like, you're just going to get cracked, right? You're just going to fucking get cracked, right? So it's scary, I think, for these people. It's like their deepest fear, but it's not anything that's articulated on a conscious level. So you can't really have that conscious of a conversation with them because they aren't really on that conscious level of seeing their own woundedness, like to this degree. Like, it's like their leg is missing, but it's like people when they talk about phantom limbs or something, they think their leg's there. They think they have a heart. They think they have a soul, but they've kind of checked out of the game a long time ago. Like, maybe something happened to them in childhood, but they just emotionally shut down. So they're never going to have that intimacy in their life, and they're going to miss out on a huge piece of the human experience, which is the dialogue that we have with other humans, the experience our souls and our spirits have when we truly consciously meet with and integrate ourselves with the human intimacy experiment, because it truly is an experiment, and you don't know what's going to happen to you. You may end up better off, you may end up worse off, you may end up a different person. But these are all risks that we all take. And then it pisses me off at some point with the culture vulture stuff, because these are people who get to go to movies all the time. The movies are based on tragedy. The movies are based on emotions. The movies are based on people losing their lives and having their lives get like broken open, and then everyone sitting around and staring at them like it's, the Roman games. Like, I don't think these culture vultures should be able to go to these events. This is like my own pet peeve, where I don't think they should be able to participate in society if they're not willing to participate. Like, these culture vultures, they go to museums. Like, in the particular situation where I mentioned the woman who's an atheist, like, she would go to museums and they would have tons of art inspired by faith, tons of art inspired by religion. Well, why does she get to go and look at that art when she dismisses like the emotion or the beliefs behind it? Like, it just kind of bothers me. But I guess it goes both ways, because I guess we appreciate atheists, and I can be sympathetic to atheists, but my whole premise with that is like, why are these culture vultures able to go to movies and go to operas, right, which are all about tragedy and death and the meat of life and people's hearts being ripped open and tragic love and heartbreak, like Romeo and Juliet? Like, I just feel like these people, without that, like, it's almost like it's like vicarious food. It's almost like that vampire series, True Blood, that had the fake blood, like, if you couldn't find a human to eat off of, or you were choosing not to feed off humans, you could go and buy this fake blood. And it just kind of reminds me of that. Like, instead of doing the real work of life and having real relationships and really working on things with people, it's this idea of, I'm going to go and feed off of all these cultural events that music or art or theater or movies or plays or travel, all these things that are going to feed that sense of needing intimacy, needing emotional intimacy and experience in my life to feel human emotions and the pain and the anger and the sadness of family disputes and fights and cutoff and murder and, heartbreak and grieving and losing loved ones and death and despair. Like, I'm just going to go and I'm going to feed off these things like a vampire, but I'm not actually going to get like my hands dirty myself. Like, I'm going to stay safely removed as a voyeur. So it's almost like you're a voyeur. And I just don't think these voyeurs should be allowed to participate in these cultural events without actually having done the work themselves on their lives. Like, if they're not willing to go to therapy and work on their own emotions, like, why do they get to go to movies? I'm just talking about people that are lifelong culture vultures, people that are lifelong in their little box and they're not going to venture out. They're not going to date, or if they date, it'll be only within that frame of what they can control. And they're so set on protecting themselves and being in their comfort zone that they will never shift in this life. They will never grow. And it's very sad for people who have any kind of closeness with these people, because you hit that wall with them where you literally cannot confront them, because they will bring up every defense they possibly have in their arsenal, because they sense that injured child within, right? And there's like a code red. It's like that movie, Everything You Ever Want to Know About Sex, But We're Afraid to Ask, with Woody Allen. It's like inside the brain, like there's like a code red, like someone goes to the culture vulture and is like, culture vulture, there's someone on the outside and they're trying to get close and they're trying to threaten your inner child and break open your sadness and your grief and make you grow and make you emotionally evolve and like really deal with your dark side and really address your own demons. And like they're coming and they're at the door and they're really insistent, and like the culture vulture's like, whoa, we're gonna get our weapons ready, like we don't want any of that, we're gonna go watch a movie, because watching a movie, oh, well, that will feed us emotionally, and we don't want anyone pushing our buttons to actually inquire about us or deal with ourselves, or because we're fine, everything is fine. And you're like, wow, like this is really scary, and it's almost like an epidemic of culture vultures. So these people can be very, very sad. The next thing I was going to talk about was sorry. And I had mentioned before my mentor, who is a Chippewa elder, and he is really big into David Hawkins, but the Dr. David Hawkins, who you can Google, but he has a map of consciousness that's very fascinating in terms of one's relationship with God or a higher power. And like a lower level functioning relationship with God or a higher power is the kind of relationship where you have a fear-based relationship, where you see God as punishing you. So if something goes poorly in your life, you say, oh, like God is punishing me. It's like a father figure, like Zeus with a thunderbolt, instead of like a higher functioning relationship with God or a higher power would be like, my God is loving and is not going to be about punishing me, and is going to be about loving me and helping anybody, like not a punisher, and not someone has this wrath and fury that I need to avoid or fear, that I don't have a fear-based relationship with my God, right? So that's just interesting to look at. But one of the things that my mentor has always been big on the past 4 years or so, which really helps me, and at some point I'll try to do a video with him, is this whole concept of sorry. And he has talked to me about David Hawkins, because David Hawkins has in one of his books like this whole list of things talking about energy and what level energy things radiate at. So like you can go see someone, like a client, and you start off at a 7 and then you leave at like a 4. Like they just drain you, they just vampire emotionally suck, energy off you. And by the time you leave there, like, whoa, you're like at a 4, right? And you've just been drained. But David Hawkins also talks about things other than people, like events or TV shows or words even. He believes there's certain words that can like bring us down to a lower level of energy. Which is interesting, because I saw a study once and we're very responsive to how people perceive us, and we pick up mostly on nonverbal cues with that. But the study was showing how there was a woman who was trying to hold her balance, and then behind her, so she couldn't see, people were either supposed to be like show like a friendly face towards her or show like a disinterested mean face towards her. And so like the instructor was behind the lady and was like, okay, everyone, like show like negativity, but not say anything, but just in your body language towards the person. And when people in the audience the watchers were exuding that negative energy, the person would lose their balance like 9 out of 10 times. And then when people in the audience were sending positive energy and smiling, or just in their body language showing positive, happy energy, the person was able to keep their balance. And so it's just really interesting, because I always like that study, because I think it's very true. Like when we are empathically picking up on the fact that people hate us, but we can't like put our finger on it because there's nothing in the verbal world, which we tend to worship this verbal world, which is ironic since we're like 96% communicating non-verbally anyway. But we just never justify this non-verbal world. It's very sad, because it's like that's where most of communication actually occurs. So when people sense, but they can't actually say like, well, everyone said such horrible things to me. But when they sense that people are thinking these horrible things, it affects our performance. That's why they say like having a bad boss is literally like the seal of death, because you're in this conflictual relationship where someone's not believing in you. They're not believing in you. They're not sending energy that's supportive. They're not sending energy that's like, how can I help you? Or how can we improve our communication? And so if you don't feel supported, and it's something you sense, right? It may not be something that someone says. It may be that you just keep sensing waves of non-support. That affects your behavior. It affects your belief in yourself. It can destroy your self-esteem. Like there's lots of things that can happen, especially with authority figures. So important to look at the nonverbal and how that's translated in our minds and our psyches as we take in the nonverbal. So first we have to acknowledge that nonverbal is a huge component of communication. Like it's just zipping and zapping about all around us, right? And our culture as a whole is very based in words. It's very much about this worship of words. It's kind of like a false worship in a way. But anyway, my mentor will talk about sorry, and he'll say to me, like, please don't use the word sorry, and please don't have people say the word sorry to you. And I've had lots of discussions with him about it, but he's clear that this is one of those low energy words. And it's really interesting to sit with, because whenever he gives me advice or gives me a position, I don't necessarily adopt it. I respect him as a mentor, as a teacher, and appreciate the blessing that he is in my life, that he came into my life. But with everyone, I think you need to have discernment, right? So when he says that sorry is low energy, it really causes me to pause and think and listen to that. Just sit beside the stream of life and just listen and think about, is that true? Does sorry have a low energy to it? And I think it is kind of true. And so what he says is, he said, well, think about how you feel in your body, in your soul, in your spirit. How do you feel after people say sorry to you? He said, it's a very low energy word. And then he said, I want you to pay attention to how you feel after you say sorry to somebody. I don't necessarily feel better. I don't necessarily feel good after I say the word sorry. And sometimes people want to dispute this. They're like, well, what if you say I apologize? And I'm like, I can see how I apologize kind of has different energy to it than sorry. But it's just interesting when you think about gematria, or you think about the power of words and whether certain words do have a lower energy frequency. And then I always kind of dig deeper on that and think about, well, why was this word adopted? Like, why are we spreading this? If it is negative energy, why are we spreading that? Like, I always think about, is there a reason behind a certain word in the English language, or because of the concept within gematria that words have meaning, that each word is composed of numbers that have values. So gematria, I mean, there's over 100 different types of gematria. I think it's a worthwhile study if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, so when my mentor talks to me about the word sorry and its meaning, according to David Hawkins, it resonates with me because I think sometimes we're not in touch with how we feel after we communicate. Sometimes we can communicate with words that really uplift us and uplift our spirit and our psyche. And after we use these words, we feel better about ourselves or the world at large. And then sometimes I think we're using words that are not contributing to the energetic frequency of the universe. And I feel like there's a trap sometimes on Facebook with that. Like, we don't see the word love enough on Facebook. Like, I love you, or I love, that love isn't really a word that we see that much in terms of social media, but love is a powerful word. And it's interesting why we don't use that word more often, because that's, I think, a powerful word. It's just interesting to think about. The last thing I was going to talk about was hands on the bus, evil eye. I just got back from Trinidad and Tobago, and when I was there, I think it's called Obea, O-B-E-A. It's similar. It's like the witchcraft, the black magic, the voodoo of the islands, but also Guyana, so other places. And a lot of times, some of these cultures, they believe in like a little god that's almost like a little spirit that you can resurrect, that doesn't necessarily, it's not malevolent and it's not benevolent. It's almost like sometimes like in between, or almost like yin yang. It can be both. So I think that's hard for the Western mindset to conceptualize, which is, to have something that contains both, that it contains both light and dark. It's a duality, because we're very much impressed by our culture, this concept of like God and the devil, like good versus evil. And I think certainly in the universe there is a direct sense of good and evil in the universe that's afoot. I think that's certainly true, but I don't know that these deities always possess characteristics of just one or the other. And I find how do I put this? I have always had like an anthropological streak as far as my interest in culture and religion, with lots of different cultures and spirituality and indigenous medicine, natural medicine. So for me, I'm always fascinated by where did cultural values around religion arise and what's the meaning behind that. And I don't discount a lot of these like voodoo kind of earth-based religions that are more present in indigenous cultures around the world, and I don't dismiss them either. There was actually a story, I think it was on NPR a little while ago, and I think I spoke about this in another video, but it was about Africa and India and how many children go up missing. And if you research, it's like phenomenal, the numbers. And a lot of it they're talking about was around sacrifice, like human sacrifice for some of these religions that believe in human sacrifice. And the article was like really dismissive to some degree, if I recall correctly, or it was critical of the dismissiveness, but it was like really pointing out, like, or at least I remember that portion of the interview, like a lot of these social scientists are almost like they're so indoctrinated into their belief system about what's normal, like you have to understand, like the Christian religion believes almost like an alien story, very similar to religions prior to Christianity, which mimic Christianity. They believe that, Jesus was the Son of God, which means Jesus impregnated a woman without actually de-virginizing her or what have you. And that's almost like an alien coming from the sky to breed with a human and having a half alien, half human baby. Like, you have to understand that can seem pretty far out there and pretty weird to cultures that have different perceptions of reality. So I think sometimes we come into these situations and we assume our belief system is normal, even though our belief system is kind of wacko too. So like if you really think about never having heard some of these stories and then you hear them, you're kind of like, wow, that's pretty weird. So I think we're very quick to judge. Maybe a social scientist would be some of these more voodoo-based cultures that literally do human sacrifice, and it's just so dark and so nasty that you don't want to actually learn about it and like explore what they believe and why they believe it. But I personally find it fascinating, and I don't mind going down that rabbit hole at all, because I want to learn about all types of religion and magic, maybe in terms of I think that there's knowledge in that, and I think there's knowledge if the more you learn, and the more you connect the dots for the different faiths in terms of what they believe, or things about spirit or energy, I think are fascinating if you can truly understand some of those things. But I don't necessarily think that makes you someone who wants to perform like bad deeds against somebody, like witchcraft, from a negative perspective, not witchcraft from a holy perspective of honoring the divine feminine, but more from a place of, I'm talking about like dark voodoo energy, not like positive voodoo energy. So maybe there is some aspects of voodoo that are actually kind of fascinating and actually mimic some of the earlier sacrifices that were part of other faiths and other religions. So sacrifices are not something that are foreign if you look at mainstream religion either. I think people just don't always understand their own religion because they don't take the time to actually study their own religion. So anyway, this brings me to the concept of evil eye. So with the concept of evil eye, it's the concept that someone is giving you the evil eye. And I remember going to a powwow once, and my friend who was native, and she was a healer, she was doing all this work with the land to heal the land of blood energy, of spilled blood, and healing the land of the spilled blood in this nation. It was really heavy work and really interesting, and she would talk to me about it, but I you never know if someone's like really doing that work or really not doing that work, or if it's possible or if it's not possible. But she, I felt like, was a legitimate healer, and I'm always open and curious. And I always kind of stay skeptical at the same time. But I remember her telling me at a certain powwow that I went to, she was like, that medicine man over there is like doing some like bad voodoo on me. And I remember asking her like what kind of bad voodoo, if you don't mind me asking. And I remember her saying like, well, he's giving me like the evil eye in a sense, like putting the evil eye on somebody, which some people associate with Mexico. And I think it's very common in Mexican culture to have that concept of the evil eye. But even if you have a hamsa, that you wear to protect you from the evil eye, you could be part of another faith like Judaism, in terms of what you believe. It's not specific just to Mexican culture, but there's definitely that association with Mexican culture in terms of the evil eye, but really a lot in Central America as well. And it derives from the idea that I remember reading once, like in Mexican culture, if you compliment a child, but you don't go and touch the child, like stroke their head or pat them on the head, after you deliver the compliment, it's considered the evil eye. Like you're almost like envious, like, oh, I love your little baby. And then like, you're not like patting the baby or pinching the cheek or something, you're not patting like the shoulder. You're just like, I think they associate it as like an energy transference. Like it's like the evil eye, and it's almost like a greedy or evil or spreading evil eye, that you're admiring this child, but you're almost coveting the child in a way. So it's similar to that. And sometimes, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but it's interesting to notice, like if you're ever on the bus, and it can happen sometimes when someone's arm is out the window when they're driving, like, and you see their hand up ahead out the window, but it's almost like their arm is disconnected from their body a little bit, and you'll see their hand like just kind of floating on the outside of the vehicle. But it's like sometimes I think that's the evil eye too, which is like literally someone can stare at the hand and literally it's like they'll start twitching their hand or something. And it doesn't happen maybe for everyone, but like if you just kind of out of the corner of your eye, like not like looking directly at the hand, but it happens on the bus too, when someone's on the bus and they're resting their hand like away from their body, like it's over the seat on the other side or something, or on the seat in front of their seat, and their hand is just kind of sitting there. It's, if you stare long enough at someone's hand, but not like directly, I think sometimes like it'll just start twitching. And when I've talked to friends like who understand like curanderas and things of this nature, there is this concept, I think, of that people can give you the evil eye, like on the bus or whatever, and they're almost like resting their eyes and delivering that kind of message, and then you receive it. So sometimes when they talk in Native American culture about smudging, it's like you're smudging off all these people and like whatever their negativity is. Like they tried to give you the evil eye, or they don't want you to be happy, deep in their souls, like they really don't want you to be happy. So it's kind of like the whole concept of a curse. And like within different belief systems, there are concepts on how to break a curse. Like literally someone might have put a curse on you unintentionally, like they're so disconnected from themselves, they have no idea that they even put a curse on you. But let's say you feel like you have a curse or some bad energy, like there are different beliefs about how to eradicate that curse and sever that curse, but there's also the concept of protection and things like that. So that's why people do amulets or things like this. And I think it's okay to talk about those things. Like sometimes people think it's taboo to discuss those things. It's almost like feeding the darkness or giving it energy. But I feel like, and in some ways, it's kind of like dragging it out into the light and saying like, well, let's look at this. Like, why can't we have a sense of humor about this? Like, it's human sacrifice that people are doing. Like, let's not necessarily have a sense of humor about it, but let's lift the veil. Like, I think lifting the veil is actually quite fascinating. But I don't discount these cultures that do believe in voodoo and things like that. Like there's like almost a racism and dismissal of it sometimes. It's kind of like, well, these people, they're like Neanderthals. They're stupid and they don't understand modern day science and they don't understand how science and medicine work. And I'm always like, really? Because maybe they understand things on a much deeper level that you can't even possibly understand. And maybe they do things or achieve things or see things that are, shamanic in nature, and that you're too scared to even conceptualize truly what it is that they have in their possession as far as energy or what they work with. And that's just based on my own personal experience, because I've been around like holy people my whole life. But I remember one time I went to Guatemala. Specifically, I went to this village. It was a Native American village, an indigenous village, and it was just fascinating to me. It had suffered an earthquake that was quite devastating. So the energy of the land was very like shooken up. It kind of had this shaken up energy, but it was also this like very old, very remote native indigenous village. And within the village, they had a god that they had resurrected. It was like a local earth god, and they had resurrected this god. And they would feed it whiskey and give it cigarettes, and they would move it from house to house. It was almost like an underground god. You would never know whose house it was going to be at, but it was like infused, the spirit was infused into like this puppet, right, that they would give the whiskey and the cigarettes to. And I remember going there, and I got into a little rickshaw, and I was just like using my faltering Spanish to get to this house to observe, because I'm always curious about things like this. And then when I went, there was like just me and the reporter and one other person, and then the people whose house it was. So it was like 3 other people in this dusty, like dirt floor, like just simple house in the middle of a cobblestone, area. But it was just like the air was just stagnant. It was just like a very weird energy. And then I remember feeling something, right? And it was similar to what I had felt when I lived with this shaman in Belize in the bush. And then, locally, the people there believe that believe that there is a spirit there in the jungle in Belize, like kind of a scary or strong spirit. I wouldn't even say scary. I would say not like this pure love and light kind of energy, but kind of like this deep, dark, waking up from a deep sleep, kind of scary, like better watch out, like not punishing, but like, whoa, like pretty energetically heavy or something. So that's what they believed in Belize, that there is this God spirit energy waking up there in the jungle. And it kind of reminded me of that. So I'd already lived in the jungle with Medicine Man and had felt the energy of deep in the jungle, just how dense it felt. And it did feel like something was waking up at times. It felt like something was there, whether it was the spirits they believed in or something bigger and greater, like a sleeping god, I don't know. But it just definitely felt like something was there. So for me, I was open to this like Guatemalan, like little earth spirit, like little god that they had resurrected or something. But I also go into these scenarios kind of just being like, yeah, or it could be just a total PR move, and it totally could be these things that we all do, which is just following false gods, left and right, and like different ideas of salvation or seeking salvation or whatever the heck, right? But I remember being in this little hut and just being like, whoa, there's something definitely here. Like you felt like the temperature change or the light change or time just stopped. It was just really creepy, but not quite creepy. I just don't have the correct word for it, but something similar to creepy, but not quite creepy. And then I remember that there was a American journalist that was there, but he and I didn't talk, but I just remember his eyes were really big and he just seemed to be kind of spaced out. And then we left, and it was just really interesting like that. So I understand the concept of the spirits being real to these people. So whether they become real because of their belief, which is some people's belief that you can actually feed something and create something by your intent, by your consciousness, by your belief in something, it's a reciprocal relationship. You're feeding it with your belief. So these things build and become stronger in terms of the spirit world or something like this. I don't know. I'm a student like anyone else, but I think it's interesting. And then when I talk about the evil eye and so forth, I don't discredit that, because like when I was in Trinidad and Tobago and the guy was talking about locally what they do for, it's not voodoo, but similar to voodoo, but not quite voodoo, the Obia. What he was talking about was, he was like, these people that are into this, they can read the future and they can put curses on people, and they will go to the local cemetery and they will dig up the graves, and then they will feed the bodies with whiskey and cigarettes and so forth, and they will make sacrifices under the full moon or whatever, who knows what kinds of sacrifices, and then they will ask for favors from these demons or these resurrected gods they make or something, and they will make deals with them, like, I'll give you my firstborn child if you do this for me. So then they will actually kill their own firstborn child, specifically because they made a pledge to these spirits. But they will ask for curses, or they'll ask for love that they want. So maybe a lot of times I think we motivate our desires for help from some deity or some spiritual force. We are requesting things we desire, right? We have desires, human desires, often based in lust or wanting. Things, that we desire. And when the gentleman was telling me and about this in Trinidad and Tobago, he also talked about a spirit in Guyana that's like a short spirit, like almost like a little god or something, but it's similar to that kind of earth force that I was talking about in Belize, like similar, like waking up from the jungle, like watch out, because once this thing wakes up, like things are not going to be pretty. And I always think it's interesting when we talk about worldliness, because some of the people that I met in Trinidad and Tobago had never been off the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. So their whole consciousness is shaped by the topography of just those islands and the Caribbean sun and the Caribbean air and the music and the culture and the food and the people and the energy, the frequency of that area. And sometimes I think we come in as outsiders and we're very exploitive. We bring this cultural footprint and we share our dysfunction, and we leave our plastic cups, and we spread, like, I don't know, one night stands or whatever we spread when we, become touristas abroad. It's a very large footprint, the American tourist. But like, when you conceptualize that it's not always the more cultured person who's the wisest. I think sometimes we're like almost like culture vultures on a very large scale, because we're like, well, I'll go to Athens and I'll get some awareness around Athens, and I'll add that to my little parcel, my little purse, that I carry with me, and I'll go to Africa and check that off my list and say I've been to Africa. Like, but we don't necessarily have the wisdom that these people have in these areas. Like, you can't infuse yourself with wisdom. And so sometimes I think we're very hungry, we're very wisdom starved in the Americas. So we are spiritually bankrupt, or we're emotionally bankrupt. We're often leading these very, false one-dimensional lives. And so I think sometimes when we go to these places, we're trying to feed our souls. We're trying to feed the spiritual and emotional aches of our fake lives or whatever. We're trying to replenish our souls and our spirits. So when we go to these places, we're sometimes like just kind of sucking up what these people already have. Like, they're happy with less, or they're more wise than we are, or they're more aware of evil than we are, or they have a greater spiritual comfort in who they are and knowing themselves, and they're at peace with themselves. And I think sometimes we just want to like suck it up and drink it. Like, we want to take them with us and be them. But we don't openly acknowledge that. We almost like pat ourselves on the back sometimes with travel, where we might say, oh, well, I've traveled all over the world. Like, I've seen snow, and I've hiked in the Appalachians, and I've gone to, China, and I've been out to Hawaii, and I've been to Russia. And like, we might tell ourselves like we're so much better than them because we're so much more worldly. But if you spread yourself extremely thin by interacting with people in a very superficial or safe way for yourself, so you're not really challenging your consciousness or your inner self, and having conflict with people and working through difficult situations and really challenging yourself in your relationships with other humans. Like, if you're just spreading yourself thin and just kind of picking up a a passport stamp from all these different countries, like, is that really the deeper life? That's the better life, that's more well lived? Because as I was in Trinidad and Tobago, I really saw the local people and their sense of themselves and their environment and their communities. And so we might say, oh, I have a global community, I have friends from all over the world, I'm very connected. but is that really true companionship or self-knowledge or self-awareness or community? Like maybe the happier person is that person in the smaller community who hasn't traveled, maybe travel isn't always so beneficial, especially when you're thinking about the colonization of some of these countries and the history of slavery. And then if you conceptualize slavery as something that's very much alive today, but we give it different language and we kind of dress it up to make it look prettier, but basically we have a slave class now, and that we all support this slavery system, basically. So I think sometimes when you come to countries that have been colonized and you're in a position of power as someone who can afford a plane ticket, or you have white entitlement or what have you, it's a whole different experience because you're bringing that energy of the colonizer, or reaping the benefits of the colonizer. So you might say, my hands are clean, I'm not personally a colonizer of these particular islands, but still as a white person or a person who can travel to those islands, who has the money for a ticket, who can afford that and has money, you're still in a place where most likely you are the benefactor in some regard. In some way, you're the benefactor of that colonization because of money or class or ethnicity. So that's pretty much it. So here we go with culture vultures, sorry, hands on the bus, and the evil eye.